It's a part of that nation. When you go out to battle, as he gives them instruction now concerning war, and notice that word when. It's never an issue of if we go out to battle. We're in a battle. Now their warfare was a physical warfare. Our warfare is a spiritual warfare that we're all involved in as Christians. So it's not an issue of if, but it's an issue of when. And notice that there are times here as he talks to them, when you go out, they were to be on the offensive in terms of God leading them in what he wanted them to do. When you go out to battle against your enemies, and they would have enemies, and see horses and chariots and people more numerous than you, that's the continual plight of God's people through the ages, is when they go into a battle, into a spiritual warfare, whatever it might be, there is always that realization that in terms of resources, we are outnumbered. You look at the control of the halls of power in our nation, and I don't even mean Congress. I don't even mean the White House. I mean CNN, NBC, CBS. They may hold maybe the greatest power in some senses today. And we look at how puny our weapons can appear at times in making stands for the Lord. And the first thing that we see in any call that God calls us to as it relates to serving Him and being a part of the battle that we're involved in, aligned with Him, we immediately become conscious of how great the weaponry and resources and numbers of the enemy are. But that's not what we're to put our focus on. That's the tendency, this warfare that we're in. God is very real. Satan is very real, and he's very real in his rebellion against God. There's a war that's going on. And so he tells them, don't be afraid. Give me one good reason. Well, there's only one good reason. And he gives it to them. For the Lord your God is with you, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Victory is based on one thing and one thing alone, and that is that God is with us. He is the deciding factor in all battles. And they were to remember how faithful God had been to deliver them from Egypt against all odds. A time just to stop and remember, God, you've been faithful to me. I've seen your power in my life, and you're no different today than you were back then. We need you, Lord. And so it shall be that when you are on the verge of battle, that the priest shall approach and speak to the people. Interesting, the priest before the officers. And he shall say to the people, Hear, O Israel, today you are on the verge of battle with your enemies. Do not let your heart faint. Do not be afraid. Do not tremble or be terrified because of them. He's giving them the eternal perspective now. And again, what is the reason? For the Lord your God is He who goes with you. He's present with us. He's present with me right now. He says, I tell you, I'd hardly go anywhere that He's not. I mean, He's everywhere, all at the same time. He goes with me. Not only is He with me, but He's with me to fight for you against your enemies. In other words, He's not going to be passive as it relates to the enemies of His people. To save you. He will save us. Paul writes in the New Testament and he tells us that we are more than conquerors. That's a tremendous statement. Tremendous statement. The body of Christ as a Christian. I'm more than a conqueror in Christ Jesus. The interesting thing is that I would have been sufficient if God had told me, I would have been happy or pleased, satisfied, if He had told me that I would be simply a conqueror. A conqueror is a person who is revealed to be the conqueror and the winner following the battle. Well, the only thing superior to that, the marks of one who is more than a conqueror, is for a person to know that they will win before they go into the battle. And that is our position. That is our place. We're more than conquerors. And they were too. They weren't to be afraid as a result of it. And the priests now, having given God's people the eternal perspective as it related to what they were going into, only then were the officers to speak. And the officers shall speak to the people, verse 5, what man is there who has built a new house and has not dedicated it? Let him go and return to his house, lest he die in the battle and another man dedicate it. So the officers are now releasing everyone that's a part of the army that has a divided heart. And some of them have a divided heart because of fear, and some of them have a divided heart for humanitarian reasons. Here's a person, he's got his house, he hasn't been able to dedicate his house, and the officers just said, go home if you want to go home. You don't want to be a part of this? Don't be a part of this. Go home. And what man is there who has planted a vineyard and who has not yet eaten of it? Let him also go and return to his house, lest he die in the battle and another man eat of it. And what man is there who is betrothed to a woman and has not yet married her? Let him go and return to his house, lest he die in the battle and another man marry her. And so all of these things that can entangle the heart of mankind, even God's people in this battle. And the officers were to say, listen, a divided heart entangled, go on home. You'll be of no value in the battle. You just go on home. And Paul writes the same thing to Timothy in the New Testament. He says, no one engaged in warfare, entangles himself with the affairs of this life, that he may please him who enlisted him as a soldier. And Paul might have been thinking about this passage as the Lord wrote that through him. And then the officers shall speak further to the people and say, what man is there who is fearful and faint-hearted? Let him go and return to his house, lest the heart of his brethren faint like his heart. Fear it's a leaven. It moves quickly through people. There are some people that all they can see is what could go wrong. All they can see is the height of the enemy, the size of the walls, all of that. Always walking in fear. There's no faith there. Now, it doesn't mean that we're not cautious and careful in the seeking of the Lord and these things. We're not talking about people who are guessing the will of God here. They know the will of God, but they're still afraid to step out on it, even with God's promises. God says, let them go. I can't use them. They'll weaken the hearts of all of the other people. And so they're dismissed. And now, with all of the fearful gone, with all of the divided hearts gone, God in effect says, now you're left with a good army. And so it shall be when the officers have finished speaking to the people, that they shall make captains of the armies to lead the people. When you go near a city to fight against it, then proclaim an offer of peace to it. Listen, we're going to take this city, and we give you an opportunity to surrender. And here are the terms of surrender. And it shall be, if they accept your offer of peace and open to you, then all the people who are found in it shall be placed under tribute to you and serve you. Now, if the city will not make peace with you, but would make war against you, then you shall besiege it. And when the Lord your God delivers it into your hands, you shall strike every male in it with the edge of the sword. But the women, the little ones, the livestock, and all that is in the city, all its spoil, you shall plunder for yourself, and you shall eat the enemy's plunder which the Lord your God gives you. And thus you shall do to all of the cities which are very far from you, which are not of the cities of these nations. They were not to establish peace or extend a truce to the cities that were in the promised land. Those were to be utterly wiped out. This is a reference to the cities that were beyond the borders of the land. Now he moves in to those cities that have to do with being in the land. I think that we have to be careful too, sometimes as we read through these passages, especially so much of it that has to do with war. A lot of you in this room have been in the military, but a lot of us haven't been. And we really haven't fought a war on this land in a very long time. And so we can lose sight of the life and death aspects of war. It wasn't a thing that when another city would attack you, that they had these paint guns. And when you got hit with a paint pellet, you had to go down and surrender your paint gun. It was serious. They were out to take your head off. It was life and death. And it meant for those who were fighting, the men who were fighting, if they were defeated, then their wives and their children are immediately behind them as a prey. And so sometimes you look at these things and it seems like, man, God is really heavy. Well, war's always been heavy. Always been a heavy thing. And the parties on each side are out to destroy one another. And so God said, listen, this is how it needs to be. But the cities of these peoples, which the Lord your God gives you as an inheritance, you shall let nothing that breathes remain alive. You shall utterly destroy them. The Hittite, and the Amorite, and the Canaanite, and the Perizzite, and the Hivite, and the Jebusite, just as the Lord your God has commanded you. Please notice verse 17. When God tells them to go in and utterly destroy the people of this land, it is not an indiscriminate slaughter. He names the tribes that he wants wiped out. He names the people by name that he wants wiped out. He knows them absolutely intimately. And his command to these people is born out of an intimate knowledge of them, of their lives, of the fact that not a single one of them is going to turn to him. And in light of that fact, the great danger that they not only pose to themselves, but now posed to the rest of mankind. And so when he looks at it from his vantage point, even God, infinite in his love, infinite in his wisdom, this is still an expression of his love and of his wisdom. He still calls for this leaven to be removed in light of its danger. You think, man, what must have been the practices of these people to have pushed a God so long-suffering as Jehovah to that place? I think of my life. And how he should have wiped me out. How he should wipe me out, I suppose. And how long-suffering he's been with me and how gracious he's been with me. It makes me just stop and think about the practices of these people. And you don't have to really think about it if you have a historical background as it relates to the Bible and you read about the practices of these people. You can read about a page of it before you feel so defiled that you put the book away. And God had been watching it for a long time. He said, I want them to be utterly destroyed, lest they teach you to do according to all their abominations which they have done for their gods, and you sin against the Lord your God. When you besiege a city for a long time while making war against it to take it, you shall not destroy its trees by wielding an axe against them. If you can eat of them, do not cut them down to use in the siege, for the tree of the field is man's food. In other words, if you're going to take the city, don't wipe out your food supply in taking it. Use the other trees. Only the trees which are not, which you know are not trees for food, you may destroy and cut down to build siege works against the city that makes war with you until it is subdued.